I'll tell you a story. I was a homicide detective when I was in San Jose, and we had a brutal murder. Individual killed his girlfriend, not to get too over graphic, but she was pregnant, and it was a stabbing. So he killed her, killed a couple of her daughters, and then lit the house on fire. And there was a lot of officers that responded, and I'll never forget, when the fire was out and suspect was in custody, we were doing a search of the house because, one of the victims was missing. And I will never forget, it's vivid in my mind as homicide detectives, we're out there at the scene, and I'm going around the house, and I peer into the bedroom, one of the bedrooms in the rear of the house, and there was a scorched bed, and right in between the bed and the wall and the window was the body of one of the little girls that he had stabbed and who was now burned. And that image is vivid. And so me and my partner at the time, my partner had 4 kids, and I have 3. So between the two of us, we had, 7 kids together, right? And, we weren't necessarily as affected, but we found out later on that there was somebody that responded to that scene, and to this day I don't know, that was going through some serious issues. And so at the time, the system we had in place is our chaplain would come in and bring the group together and talk about the incident. And I remember getting invited to that. And this, again, I was a sergeant at the time, so it was a long time ago. And, I was one of those guys that turned to my partner. I go, why am I going to this? I'm fine. Why am I going to this? Being in homicide, I think, at least for me, we get some closure, right? When you see an incident like that, we strive to bring those victims justice, right? The closure we get is by getting that suspect, and we did, and following through the investigation, getting them convicted, which we did. And so that's kind of the pathway for healing, I guess, so to speak, which is probably a short-sighted way to look at it. The other pathway is just going home and hugging your kids, at the end of the day also. But the point of it is that now I understand the importance of us having been in that group, because for the individual that was affected, if there's people there that aren't affected, we were supporting the individual that was. And that's important. That's why I don't think that way anymore, right? And I learned from that, it wasn't about whether I was okay and my partner was okay or not. It was the fact that we were there, even though we felt fine with what we went through, that we were there in support of whoever was having difficulty with it. It's officer safety. You're there. Don't roll your eyes. If you don't need help, don't ask a question. But you're there, if you're not affected, to support your brother or sister who is affected. And that is a derivative of officer safety. And people that don't practice that mantra, then you know what? You don't really get to say we love each other, right? You don't really get to say that. We need to normalize the fact that if you're going through some sort of mental trauma, that you reach out for help. But we equally have to normalize like you go to a gym every day when you're in shape. We have to normalize the fact that, having periodic check-ins with specialists just to kind of talk about certain things before it turns into something greater is just as important as well. It's easy to say that you care about your officer's wellness, but until you put resources towards that, it doesn't mean anything. You got to do things out. You got to not think outside the box, but act outside the box. There's way too much thinking outside the box. There's got to be acting outside the box. We should be doing difficult things to better our profession and not look at something being so difficult. I always use the mantra, listen, we're planting trees that we're never going to experience the shade under. I don't know anybody who hasn't done it, but if there's someone out there that's saying officer wellness is important, if they've not put resources towards it, it really means nothing. You will save lives. I don't say that as hyperbole. You will save lives. You will save officers' families. You will save marriages. You will save kids from getting on the conveyor belt that have seen their parents go through this. It is so far-reaching and so important to do.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community. And now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences, We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal,
And we can learn from those mistakes.
and together we can bridge the divide.
Welcome back, ATO Family. This show's mission has many purposes. It's meant to motivate, inspire, educate, and at the very least, you might be entertained during your daily drive, your workout, or your escape from your busy life. One mission I didn't mention is that we also want to help provide hope. Today we want to welcome on back to the mic the leader of the Dallas Police Department, Dallas PD Chief Eddie Garcia. Chief, thanks for coming back.
No, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, we've had a hard couple months here with Dallas PD, and we feel it's important to get you back on to talk about this department's mission and staying the course, especially when it comes to mental health. So you ready to dive into it?
Let's do it.
Chief, when you started in 92, I've heard you talk about this before, about the outlook on mental health in this profession. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I talk about this quite often, is that from a cultural perspective, in the last, being someone that, I've been doing this job in this profession for over 3 decades. So I've seen the changes that have happened, and oftentimes it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. But dealing with the mental wellness of police officers is one of the biggest cultural changes that's occurred in American law enforcement. When I started in 92, man, I remember if there was a call that screwed me up and I looked at my partner and I go, man, dude, that call messed me up a little bit. I don't know how to feel about that. My partner would have looked at me and said, dude, we need to suck it up. We got 9 more hours. So we would have sucked it up. If I would have told my lieutenant at that time in the early 90s that call screwed me up, my lieutenant, and anybody that's been here that started that long ago will tell you this is absolute fact. That lieutenant would have looked at me in the eye and said, kid, maybe this isn't the right job for you. That's not hyperbole. That's reality. That's how law enforcement was. I like to tell you that in California, and I would imagine nationally. And that just needed to change. Absolutely needed to change. The issue and the problem is that, excuse me, we get a lot of, and I've spoken to a lot of my buddies that are retirees that still have that same old mentality. And we all know those retirees that have been through it and have dealt with it, and they may have their own demons. But I've had arguments with some of my good friends and go, no, man, we got to think differently. We got to think differently. It wasn't right the way we thought back then. And so it's a big culture shift, not only for, our current rank and file that are working for us to be able to come forward, right? Because that's one of the most difficult things that we do, right? The whole part of the job and the whole machismo part of it, and, that our men and women go through with regards to not wanting to seem weak by coming forward internally. But then really, we have those officers that, that have retired, that have gone through the fires as well, that may not be on that same page, that we need to change the culture. And that's absolutely false. It needs to happen in order for us to get better.
You started the wellness unit over a year ago. It's actually been a year, almost 2 years. You put Chief Ramirez in charge, said, hey, take the temperature of the department, see what's going on. Why did you feel a need to do that? Why did you think that we would need a unit like this?
Well, looking at the trauma we face, talking to individuals and how difficult it is for people to come forward, the lack of trust that they have in administrations, right? That's a 3 decade long, if not long, much longer than that, of lack of trust in administrations. The fact that, it's difficult to get police officers to come forward and they have issues that's affecting their lives, their work, their family lives. really wanted to get a unit that really was proactive about it. As I often say, listen, staffing issues are staffing issues, and every department's going through it. But, it's easy to say that you care about your officers' wellness, but until you put resources towards that, it doesn't mean anything. And I hate to say that there's other departments elsewhere that say it's important but have yet to put resources to it. I'll just say it. It means nothing. It's hollow. We could use every one of those individuals that are in that unit out in the field and doing things. But without the wellness of our officers being paramount, there's no crime plan, there's no community outreach that's going to be successful. And so it's important. Obviously looking at the amount of officers that were getting into trouble for alcohol-related offenses was something that dawned on me. And I said, listen, we have to be more proactive, which is one of the reasons we started our alcohol rehabilitation program. But we had to be more proactive. Obviously, it's been well documented now that if officers come forward before they get into trouble, that we're going to help them, that we want to help them. And there's been a lot of success stories around that. But we need to be better. We need to be more proactive. There's a myriad of issues that I think as a chief that you have to deal with. But this is one that's so easily forgotten, but arguably one of the most important things you have to do. Because you have to come to the realization, and having done this job, and I say this all the time, I'm a cop first and I'm a chief second. And, I see what our officers go through every day, and ensuring that I've done, that this department has done, try to do everything we can to ensure that the resources are out there is important. Now, I'm not naive, right? I always know that whenever departments roll these things out, that there's going to be some distrust into, okay, what's the catch here? There's got to be a catch. And I think with regards to the alcohol rehabilitation program and whatever, I think it's important to ensure that our rank and file feel that there's a lot of trust between, the sixth floor and what we're trying to accomplish. But I think that then that will permeate throughout all the other programs that we'll try to launch, that there is no catch here, that we just want to make sure that our officers stay healthy. If officers are going through some trauma, that we can get them the help they need. But to be frank, I'll draw this akin to physical fitness. One of my mantras with physical fitness is the best way to get in shape is to stay in shape. And so from a mental health perspective, the way to stay mentally healthy, the way to get mentally healthy is to stay mentally healthy, and to really take that stigma away from just having a conversation with individuals and having those resources available. But it's something that I hope more and more departments undertake. I know from a major city chief's perspective, this is a huge point of emphasis for us with regards to mental health and mental wellness and how do we make our officers better. From the community, I've heard many times from the community meetings before we started the wellness program is, what are we doing for officers' mental wellness? Because they recognize and realize what some of our officers see in a day, sometimes in a day, if not a week or in a day, is more than any resident is going to see in their lives, right? That has an impact. And I think all of us are starting to, not all of us, I think most are starting to recognize that it's normal. We need to normalize the fact that if you're going through some sort of mental trauma, that you reach out for help. But we equally have to normalize like you go to a gym every day when you're in shape. We have to normalize the fact that, having periodic check-ins with specialists just to kind of talk about certain things before it turns into something greater is just as important as well.
It's like you're doing a maintenance check basically on your body and your mind.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be in crisis before you make that phone call or before you ask for resource. We want to establish a culture where we can actually talk about and I think you've done that, and we've done that with this unit already just a year in. I can't tell you how many people ring the doorbell. I got an email actually on Facebook just this week from a very young officer saying he's struggling. I don't think that would have happened, and I've been here since '97. I know this long-standing culture in this department. That would not have happened early in my career. You wouldn't have that, especially from a young officer that has more fear because he feels he's being judged by the older officers, and the profession is intimidating.
It absolutely is. It is an intimidating profession. To harken back to the story I gave you, or what would have happened in the early '90s. That still is going through the minds of officers, but I think there's a level of trust that's being built. You have all done a tremendous job. I could not be prouder of the work of you doing, as I always say, man, a coach is only as good as his or her players. And you guys have embraced it from what was a 64,000 view level and have done so much for it, with it. And we need to continue to do more. And again, I think we're starting, again, it's like moving a cruise ship, moving a battleship. Not going to happen overnight. This is an entrenched culture that we have. But I can honestly I think we can all look in the mirror and say the pendulum is starting to swing within the Dallas Police Department.
By the messages I get from people from around the country, from other PDs reaching out all the time, wanting to know, hey, what are y'all doing down there in Dallas? They I had people that reach out after the Chiefs Magazine article, and then also just people hearing the podcast. Hey, would you mind if we come down and meet with y'all, and can we see your policies? Can we look at your playbook? Gladly. We want to help. But I will say that's different from our department, from some of the other ones that I've reached out to me and I've gone back and forth with. They don't have support from the top. And that is extremely important starting something like this. You're talking about a culture change. You're not talking about a chase policy or the way you wear a beard or a uniform policy. This is changing a culture that has been going on, has been entrenched for centuries. This place has been in business for over 140 years. It's hard to change something that's that established.
It's very difficult. But you know what? You do things that are difficult. You have to do things that are difficult. I can't recite the JFK speech that he gave as to why we went to the moon. But we should be doing difficult things to better our profession and not look at something being so difficult. I always use the mantra, listen, we're planting trees that we're never going to experience the shade under. I'm not going to be here forever. And we need to establish something that starts good now. And within 5-10 years, we're going to look back. I'll be able to look back from wherever I'm at. You can look back. We can all look back from wherever we're at that point in time and look at this police department and go, that's what we wanted. That's the direction we wanted. And we get too stuck on making changes immediately. And when we deal with culture issues in the department, we can't think like that. We got to start with small things. And they're difficult things, but you got to do them to better the department. I think any police chief that takes the helm of a department has to look at its weaknesses and how do you make them better. There'll be another chief after me that'll come in and say, you know what, I'm going to make it better than when Chief Garcia was here. I hope they do that. They have to do that. And that's how we better this profession. But that was a huge blind spot I felt that we had. And not just we. It's a national issue. It shouldn't have been so new, really. We see a lot of initiatives now. But it's something that I'm proud of. And it's something that, of all the initiatives that we've started here in Dallas in nearly the 3 years that we've been here together, I think this is definitely one of the ones that we should be most proud of.
Did you have the similar outlook when you were in San Jose?
I had the similar outlook when we were in San Jose. We had systems in place when I was in San Jose with regards to crisis teams and when individuals were involved in high stress and in situations that could screw them up. But we needed to be more proactive, right? That's one of the things that you learn from having done this job. I think I'm in my 8th year of being a police chief, and nearly 32 years on. And you learn as you go, right? It's like every year you learn something else. And so when I got here, that was one of the things that we just need to be more proactive, because I know cops. I'm one, and I know it's very, very difficult to come forward. And so we had those outlooks, but we weren't doing enough. There's systems in place here. Our psych services does a great job as well, but as we all know, sometimes officers don't feel comfortable. They feel that it's somewhat part of the department, and there's some angst and distrust, and they do a tremendous job as well. And so we had a lot of great things here that we could build on. It wasn't like necessarily we were starting something from scratch, but we wanted to go from good to great. And we need to continue to work to strive to get there. We got a long way to go, and there's a lot more things we got to do. But I had the same mentality, and it really isn't necessarily. 'Cause I'll tell you a story. I was a homicide detective when I was in San Jose, and we had a brutal murder. Individual, killed his girlfriend. Not to get too over graphic, but she was pregnant, and it was a stabbing. So he killed her, killed a couple of her daughters, and then lit the house on fire. And there was a lot of officers that responded, and like, I'll never forget, when the fire was out and suspect was in custody, we were doing a search of the house because, one of the victims was missing. And I will never forget, it's vivid in my mind as homicide detectives, we're out there at the scene, and I'm going around the house, and I peer into the bedroom, one of the bedrooms in the rear of the house, and there was a scorched bed, and right in between the bed and the wall and the window was the body of one of the little girls that he had stabbed and who was now, burned. And that image is vivid. And so me and my partner at the time, my partner had 4 kids, and I have 3. So between the two of us, we had, 7 kids together, right? And, we weren't necessarily as affected, but we found out later on that there was somebody that responded to that scene, and to this day I don't know, that was going through some serious issues. And so at the time, the system we had in place is our chaplain would come in and bring the group together and talk about the incident. And I remember getting invited to that. And this, again, I was a sergeant at the time, so it was a long time ago. And, I was one of those guys that turned to my partner. I go, why am I going to this? I'm fine. Why am I going to this? And, being in homicide, I think, at least for me, we get some closure, right? When you see an incident like that, we strive to bring those victims justice, right? The closure we get is by getting that suspect, and we did, and following through the investigation, getting them convicted, which we did, and so that's kind of the pathway for healing, I guess, so to speak, which is probably a short-sighted way to look at it. The other pathway is just going home and hugging your kids, at the end of the day also. But the point of it is that now I understand the importance of us having been in that group, because for the individual that was affected, if there's people there that aren't affected, we were supporting the individual that was. And that's important. And that's why I don't think that way anymore, right? And I learned from that, it wasn't about whether I was okay and my partner was okay or not. It was the fact that we were there, even though we felt fine with what we went through, that we were there in support of whoever was having difficulty with it, right? That they may not, and I thought about it at the time. I said, and I get they have no control over this case, right? Like the control we had was, okay, we're frustrated. We want to bring justice to this family. But there's other people that aren't the lead homicide detectives on this case that may not have that outlet, and to be there in support was so important back then. And that's how we're carrying on now. And that's why I like to see, when we brought the experts in to talk to our rank and file for the recent tragedies that we've had, is that I know not everyone's affected, but that the importance of them being in the room together is that they support their brother and sister. We talk about officer safety, right? If you go to one single officer in this department and says, hey, if your brother or sister officer is calling for code 3 cover because they're in a fight with someone, there's not an officer in this police department that's going to say, I'm dropping everything I'm doing. I'm going to risk my life to save my partner. Well, this is kind of no different, right? I mean, we're there for, it's still officer safety, and to be there in support of our men and women, even when we're not affected, is just as important as being affected and asking for help.
So David Massey with the wellness unit was talking to a group one day, and he said something that kind of caught me off guard, and I'll paraphrase it here, but he basically said, if you don't agree with what we're doing, if you don't like it, just be quiet about it, because what I'm doing might help somebody else in this room. And we, as cops, we're pretty bad about shitting on each other, right? So bad-mouthing what the wellness is doing just because it doesn't work for you, or you might not need the help, might keep somebody else from actually going and getting the help that they need. So very similar to what you're saying, and I think that having somebody stand up and actually say that is a huge deal to moving the tide to the direction we want.
It is officer safety, right? If you care about, I mean, you're in that room for a reason. If you weren't the one affected, we're not calling these individuals in because no one's affected. Someone's affected, and so we love each other, right? We talk about that all the time. We give each other shit. There's no question about it, and the banter. And I wouldn't have it any other way in a department. That's what's amazing to work with men and women. And, we have to cut the tension and the stress with humor, and we do that. And sometimes we bag on each other quite a bit. But when it comes to these types of issues, it's officer safety. You're there. Don't roll your eyes. If you don't need help, don't ask a question. But you're there, if you're not affected, to support your brother or sister who is affected. And that is a derivative of officer safety. And people that don't practice that mantra, then you know what? You don't really get to say we love each other, right? You don't really get to say that. And so, it's just important to take that in and to recognize the fact that we're here for each other. And if you're not affected and you're in a way that by you being there, by you not rolling your eyes, by you just sitting there and listen, you may not know who it is. But you're helping somebody.
I want to kind of touch on that a little bit, Chief. Is one of our recent tragedies. I was out at the scene, and I'm just going to tell you from my perspective. You showed up, and you went and talked to the widow, and then right afterwards, you came over to me and you said, "I want all of my special ops people to be in front of a group or a counselor tomorrow." You said, "I don't care how you do it. I want it done." And I was stunned and kind of taken aback, like, oh, that's a big undertaking. But I believed in what you just told me, and you ordered it out. I can't tell you how much I respected that. And I'm like, we're going to do everything. We're going to move heaven and earth to make this happen. Long story short, the very next day, we had everybody in special ops, and I counted them up. There's roughly over 300 officers in all these meetings throughout the whole day. Dr. T's group came out and met with them all. And it was close to 10% of the department. And that was like a sandlot football play we drew up on the side of the house, literally on the side of a house in the dirt. I can't thank you enough for that.
No, listen, I can't thank you enough. I recognize how daunting a task that was to get all of our special ops groups in a room the very next day. I couldn't have been more impressed with the work that you all did to make that happen. One of the reasons we needed that to happen with regards to when it comes to special operations, listen, I know the mission of this police department, and I know the dangers that because of our mission that we put our officers in harm's way. I know that every time, and it's just philosophical, but every time one of our officers or one of our units goes after the worst of the worst that we have in our city, and puts himself in harm's way. The 9 officer-involved shootings we've had this year, we've been shot at first 7 times. Sometimes you feel a little bit responsible as a chief because that's our mission. We have to take the criminal element off the street. So every once in a while, when they put themselves in harm's way, I'm like, man, they're putting themselves in harm's way because that's the mission that I've given, that I know we have to do. But it doesn't come without having some remorse when those things happen, even though that's what we have to do. When our special operations units go out, to what they do, and this is not, patrol sees this every single day, and we've reached out to them. But to be specific on special ops, they're operating in the red every day they go out. We'd like to say, there's a lot of positive interactions that they'll have, but that's not reality. They're going after the worst of the worst and the most violent criminals of the city, and they will do that to protect the residents of the city and put their lives in harm's way every single day. That is not normal. That is not a normal thing, and sometimes you got to take a step back and recognize that fact that they don't have opportunities often to give out stickers and see people, in their best. They see people at their worst every day, going after violent criminals every day, recognizing that this might be the day. To operate in that world is not normal, but it is 100% necessary to keep our cities and communities safe. So we have to do what we can proactively because let's face it, it's a different breed, the individuals that are in special ops. I've been there. If we were to break things up, as a group, a lot of them will not come forward for help, and so we have to be proactive and know. Listen, just trust me. This will help somebody. And after that incident occurred, it was just incredibly important for me to normalize that as well, that, yeah, you're in special operations, and they call it special operations for a reason. But you're not special when it comes to mental wellness. You're going through the same shit everyone else goes through, and you're going through it every single day. Every operation you do, you are fearing for your life, and you do it. They do it professionally, and it's amazing to see. But at the same time, you can't take it for granted, and so that's why it was important to do it quick. We forget things real easy in police departments, and really as a society. If you don't do something now, people will forget the importance of it in a week from now. And that's just the reality of our jobs, of our beloved profession. And so that's why it was important to me to do it as quickly as possible before people forget.
Thank you for that night. Thank you for doing that at that moment, because you really came up with that on the fly, and you told me, I don't care how you do it, just get it done. And we were going to do it. Because, the first initial, whoa, wait a minute, we can't do that. We have manpower issues. There's ops to run. There's this. Yes, there are. That will all continue later on down the road, but we're going to do this first. It's got to happen.
It has to happen. But again, I tell you, and I take credit for nothing. I mean, if it wasn't for the work that, our wellness unit has done, that you have done to establish it now. I always like to say I don't want to operate in times of crisis. Imagine if we did not have a wellness unit, and I still would have said that, but how much more difficult it would have been to do that, right? And so this is why, if there's any agency anywhere that's listening to this, and maybe they haven't gone through the trauma we've gone through or other agencies have gone through, it's going to happen. And so start something so that if tragedy does hit, you can turn to someone and say you need something done instead of developing something there on the fly. And so, again, I can't thank you enough for doing that. I understand it was a huge undertaking, but necessary, and really continues to set the tone as to how this police department looks at wellness.
Chief, I wanted to briefly touch the alcohol policy that you put in place within this last year. For the listeners, if they're not aware, especially other agencies, the policy was that if an officer came forward and had a problem before there was anything administrative or criminal or likewise some kind of investigation, the department would allow them to go for help. I believe it's for 30 days. We would do our best to make sure that we could cover those costs for them as well. And I think the real important part on this policy was that when they came back from this rehab or program, they were allowed to return back to their original job posting. And if you can just touch on that, what were your thoughts on that? Because recently we've had 2 of those people who went through the alcohol policy come back and actually promote, and one to a lieutenant, which in this department is a rank of stature and responsibility. And to see that him going through that program did not affect his career path and the trajectory in which he had planned for himself, it says a lot about the policy, but if you can just speak to it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously we were getting a lot of officers, a lot of department members that were getting into trouble, whether it's criminal, administrative, over alcohol-related issues. And, one of the dynamics really when you start looking at it is, when that occurs to an officer, not only is a discipline process in place, they go on administrative leave for an extended period of time, the effects that has on families, et cetera, then they come back depending on, the criminal allegations or what have you, or the severity of the alcohol-related issue, termination often followed. And so we lose an officer. And we know, there's probably not a conference that you go to that, let's face it, whether we want to like it or not, the number one way police officers cope with stress is alcohol. And obviously we need better mechanisms to cope with stress than that. But, I started thinking about the fact, we either pay now or pay later. And what I mean by that is, so if an officer comes forward before they get into an issue, administrative or criminal, like you said, and one of the reasons officers wouldn't come forward before, I believe, is the fact that if they went somewhere, they wouldn't be getting paid when they went somewhere, right? They'd have to be using their own time. for an illness that, in my opinion, oftentimes is a result of the job. And so if they come forward before, we will put them on leave, paid leave, for 30 days. So they will still be getting their check for 30 days to go through an inpatient alcohol rehabilitation program, the costs of which are covered by ATO and other grants and other things that we have. And I think to my knowledge now, I think we've had 13 people go through the program. And one of the dynamics of it that I really wanted to make clear from the start of it was really going to be a no questions asked. To be frank, the only reason I know 2 names is because those 2 individuals wanted to tell me who they were. I very seldom know who's there. I just want them to get better. There was a promise that was made. If you haven't gotten into trouble and you go get help, it's not going to affect your career. And listen, as I said before, man, I'm a cop first and a chief second. I know there was a lot of people, and obviously when Gordon came in to have a conversation with me at one point, and I think in your podcast, when he saw the policy, he just said, "This is bullshit. There's got to be a catch. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to go on the front desk. I'm going to get off patrol or what have you. There's a catch." But then some people don't have a choice but to reach out to that olive branch. And, you never know till you know. And so, obviously individuals, when they successfully complete the program, they go back to where they were. And I don't want it to be a blip on their career. And I'll say this. There are members of every department, of every rank in this country that is suffering from alcohol abuse, right? So it would be disingenuous to have someone go through a program and then say it's going to affect your career, you're not going to get where you want to go. When we know in this department, and we know in every department in this country or in this world, at every rank, there's individuals that are already operating as alcoholics. And so, I think not only when individuals have left that program going back to the units they were in, but yeah, I'm incredibly proud of being able to promote 2 of them that went through the process. I thank them for trusting the department, for trusting me. And it really sends a message. If there was anybody, at least from the alcohol rehabilitation program, that thought there was a catch, I hope that those fears went away the day those 2 individuals crossed the stage and got their lieutenant's bar and their sergeant stripes. And it's important for that program, but I think it's important for every program that we roll out, that every program that you guys are still, cooking up to better this department, for people to know there is no catch. The only catch is do it, recognize it. There's got to be some skin in the game. Come forward before you get into an issue and a problem. And, it's really helped the credibility of the wellness program. I know there's probably more stories than that from individuals. Trust me that I know when this comes out, there's got to be a catch. There's got to be a catch. Well, this department not only had those individuals go back to their units, but promoted them both. And I think it's incredibly important for them to have recognized, for them to have trusted. When we know this is a huge issue from wellness and alcoholism and alcohol abuse and dealing with stress, who better as a leader, who better as a lieutenant or a sergeant, when they have an officer or someone come to them, they are a trusted source. And they're going to be they're going to be advocates of the program to make our officers better. I couldn't think of a better a better characteristic to have as it pertains to wellness, to have been able to promote those 2 individuals who have had remarkable careers, incredibly well respected by rank and file, that took the steps necessary to make their lives better, and not just professionally, but personally as well. And so I'm proud of that.
We've talked to those guys pretty well at this point, ad nauseum. But the thing that resonates the most with me is that they now want to help other people. And that's one of the big things that comes out of that program is service is healing. So for them to be able to come back and get right back to work and other people see them, and now they're in leadership positions where they can help other people, that's enormous, Chief. I don't know that we can overstate that at all. No,
it just makes our department stronger, man. That's the whole goal. Whenever you come into a place, you want to make it better than it was when you first got here. And as I said earlier, there'll be a chief after me that'll want to make this place better than when it was before he or she got into sitting in my seat. And I think that's huge. It starts bringing down that distrust in the sixth floor. I'll put sixth floor in quotes, but every department has a sixth floor that officers look at, and there's distrust. And I'm hopeful that our rank and file will know that when we say we want you, that your wellness is paramount, that they'll look at those examples and recognize and realize that we really mean what we say.
Chief, I want to ask one final question. I want you to direct it not only to the Dallas Police Department, but to the many agencies, first responder community, the leaders of other first responder communities, police, fire. What would you want to say to them to help them have hope in making change and establishing a culture that we're trying to do here in Dallas?
I really just say it starts with the leadership. The buy-in is going to be in there from the majority of the rank and file. I think the rank and file, we all recognize that mental wellness is incredibly important. Don't operate in a time of crisis. There may be some that have not gone through what we've gone through or have gone through what other departments have gone through. They're thinking, I don't have a need for this, because you absolutely do. You just don't see it. At that time, it is there. It's in every department. Don't operate in a time of crisis. If you have a credible program and you've not had issues, I can almost guarantee any leader, whether it be police or fire, if they set up a wellness program, they would be shocked to see the amount of references or the outreach to their wellness programs by starting something proactively and dealing with something before crisis hits. And then by establishing something like that when crisis does hit, you have a tool. You have an invaluable tool for your rank and file. What I'd say is it's not enough to simply say officer wellness or firefighter wellness is important. It rings hollow until you put your necessary resources to address it. And again, another message I would give to other leaders, with regards to this is when we talk about wellness, it's not a checkbox. Wellness is more than just having an app on your phone. It's more than software. Yeah, that could play a part, but it's just one ingredient. You're checking a box when you have a phone app. Wellness is about having other human beings that understand what other human beings are going through and having conversations. And so I would just say if all departments have their phone apps and things of that nature without having dedicated individuals that are reaching out, you're missing the mark, and we need to be better. And so again, I don't know anybody who hasn't done it, but if there's someone out there that's saying officer wellness is important, if they've not put resources towards it, it really means nothing. Your rank and file will appreciate it. You will save lives. I don't say that as hyperbole. You will save lives. You will save staffing, which is really the least important. You will save officers' families. You will save marriages. You will save kids from getting on the conveyor belt that have seen their parents go through this. It is so far-reaching and so important to do. And when you get people in that unit that really care, the unit runs itself, because all of you, this is not all of you have the heart, and all of you care. And there is, obviously the help that we get in Dallas from our nonprofits and others and other organizations that want to help. There's help in every city. They're just waiting for departments to ask them for help. That's all they're waiting for. And, working, obviously hand in hand with your associations, unions for places that have those as well, and bringing them all on board. This is probably one of the easiest policy changes or cultural changes in a department that you have to make. No one's going to argue against it. And it really is that, you want to do your very best that, that if God forbid tragedy strikes, that you've done everything you could, and there's always more you can, but to the point that crisis hits, that you did everything you could to ensure that your men and women had the resources to stay healthy, both physically and mentally. And our unit's going to grow. There's going to be more initiatives. But getting that trust and getting those, and when I say wins, I mean wins from a trust perspective. We're very fortunate, that those two individuals, as an example, that got promoted were exceptional police officers that came forward. And so you have these examples where, that distrust that exists, as I said, in every, quote, sixth floor in this country, that distrust starts to build into trust. And then that's how you continue to build the morale. When you say you care about your people, you got to do things out. You got to not think outside the box, but act outside the box. There's way too much thinking outside the box. There's got to be acting outside the box. And I think we've acted outside the box because of the amazing individuals we have in wellness, because of the amazing men and women that we have working on this department. And then it builds from there. And as you made mention earlier, are individuals that have gone through these programs that now want to be advocates for the program, well-respected police officers, that there's going to be some young cops someday that's going to look at that sergeant, that lieutenant, that aren't shy about, the darkness that they went through, that's going to say to themselves, all right, as I started this off, this is normal. I'm going to ask for help, and this department's going to get me help.
Boss, thank you for being innovative for this profession. You truly are a old street cop masquerading as a 4-star chief. Thank you for what you brought to the city of Dallas. The city and this department is very lucky to have you.
I appreciate that, but again, I take no credit. I mean, you have we have an amazing department. I'm just fortunate enough that I was able to get here when I did, and just kind of give a little bit of direction, and you guys take it from there. And whether it's crime fighting or whether it's this initiative in wellness, you guys are amazing, so I appreciate all of it.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, I'll pull you up. Life leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run. Up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. I'll never give up on you. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up on you.